Starting a tech career can seem impossible, especially when you don't have the skills employers are looking for. On the flip side, employers can find it hard to hire people with the skills they need given the rapid pace of change in the industry. Today, we're going to talk with the CEO of a company working to bridge this IT skills gap in a novel way on this episode of Dynamic Development. I'm your host, Bill Detweiler, and today I'm joined by Kip Wright, CEO of Talent Path, an IT staffing firm that's helping people jumpstart their tech careers in a very unique way. Kip, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Talent Path. How is it different from other IT staffing companies that people may be more familiar with, like Tech Systems or Insight Global? What's different about Talent Path?
Yeah, and if you will, I'll give you a little bit of the story behind it too, because I think that's an important piece. So when you look at most IT staffing providers, we generally provide a range of services that span from contract resources, contract to hire, or recruiting very specifically for full-time employment on behalf of companies. And when you're in that mode, you're generally, in many respects, the broker of talent. You're going out, you're finding resources. You're generally doing that in a bit of a reactive manner. Client will come and say, I need this resource with 5 years experience, 10 years of experience. You go and find them. And that certainly is a big part of what we do as a company. But several years ago, we realized that we were starting to see a pretty significant trend in the marketplace. The demand curve continued to go up and to the right, so to speak, and the supply curve was going quite the opposite. In fact, it reached a point where at any point in time, and kind of think about this pre-COVID, you were dealing with over 1 million open IT jobs at any point in time in the US. The US was creating 200,000 net new IT positions, net new every year. And we were only graduating somewhere around 80,000 MIS or CIS degree resources. So that was one challenge. Of course, we had the H-1B program, but that would allow you to bring up to maybe 85,000 additional resources. But we can all do the simple math and realize that's not equal to 200,000. So we were seeing real challenges. We weren't able to find the talent that we needed. There were new and emerging skills that were coming out at a pretty fast pace. And even in those that were out in the marketplace, you weren't able to find those resources with the specific skills that clients wanted. So we realized we could either do two things. One, we could spend more money on job boards, on recruiting costs. We could open up a center maybe in the Philippines or in India to help us with sourcing. But even then, we were still fishing in the same pond. And so we said, maybe it's time to change that. And it's not usual for a staffing company to think about shifting its model and actually creating talent, because we have been built around an economic model that's very different. But in Talent Path, what we do is we literally create talent, okay? And so we go and we work very specifically with universities. We find top graduates. We can talk a little bit more about the quality and the chemical makeup of what makes a good candidate. And then we put them through an immersive usually 3 to 4 month boot camp, where they are coming out of there with very specific skills that are in the highest demand for our clients. So we're launching the careers of those individuals in one respect, and we're creating very specific skilled resources for our clients. And we can do that in a much more cost-effective manner. And the beauty of it is we're hiring those individuals, so they're getting a full paid salary, full benefits. They're not paying for the training as part of that. And that then allows us to find the best graduates to launch their career without putting on additional student debt. And we think it's a really unique model.
So what were you not seeing coming out of, I guess, the universities and colleges that you, in the talent pool, like you were talking about MIS, CIS graduates, but it seems like there was maybe a disconnect between the skills that people were coming out of even traditional 4-year programs and being able to translate that knowledge into an in-demand job. Was that the case or no? And I know I wanted to ask you about the types of people you look for and maybe this is a really good segue. So, are the types of people that you pull in people that have already been through some type of higher education? Are they people who have been through? Are they people with like military service, or maybe they had a career in logistics, or they had a but it wasn't tech. Talk a little bit about maybe that's a really good way to sort of combine those together.
Yeah, and I want to pin the first part of your question and come back to it because I think it's really interesting to ask the question, why aren't they coming out with those skills? So let's come back to that. But let's talk first about the candidate pool. So we aren't necessarily targeting graduates that have MIS or CIS degrees, and I know that may sound surprising. But if I go back to to this, this story in terms of the 80,000 that are being graduated from collectively universities, you're not creating net new. You're only tapping in and qualifying those even further. So what we generally do is we partner very closely with the STEM colleges inside of our university partners. We embed our recruiters so that they're working with the professors, they're working with not just career placement services, but they're on campus, they're creating, and we're actually giving training back. So we offer pre-hire kind of seminars or courses where they can come in and on a Saturday or they can learn about the tech field and learn more about what that might mean for them. But business degrees, engineering, math, sciences, those tend to be the ones that we are finding the best traction for. We eventually would like to get to a point where we're able to hire liberal arts graduates. That is something that we'll have to do more to prepare them to be able to take on those. But they don't necessarily have to be that MIS or CIS degree profile. Now, the other thing that we're doing, which we think is really unique and frankly is now very conversational in the environment that we deal with a lot of the social justice and social equality and balance that we're focusing on, is we recognize that when you look within the tech sector, okay, when you look within the tech sector, if you look at it from a race perspective, you have whites and Asians that overwhelmingly dominate that. And Black and Hispanics represent less than half of their relative percentage of the population in the tech field. So there's a real opportunity to address the diversity balance within that. And then the flip side of that is the gender piece, where you have 3 out of every 4 jobs within technology, and I think it's even higher when you look in the leadership roles, actually go to men versus women. And so what we try to do within our hiring profile, we're looking for the right cognitive skills, we're looking for the right balance, the right educational background, but we're also trying to find and hire a disproportionate mix of minorities and females, because we know that our clients are looking for solutions that help them address that. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't hire non-minorities or men, but it just means that if we can tweak that a little bit and target more aggressively, we can with intention help address a social problem as well as a technical candidate need.
Okay, so let's go back to that university question, because I think, like you said, it ties together. What are those kind of, and you kind of mentioned it there with when you were talking about cognitive sort of skills. What are those measures that you look for in candidates, and are you primarily working within colleges and universities, or are you also looking outside of that, maybe as people who are doing retraining coming out of another job into the IT industry?
We actually are building, if you will, a network of partnerships to allow us to support. Universities is the first and most obvious because we can get to resources that we know have a certain profile. We can target them, but frankly, we're talking to some other groups and building partnerships in those. There's a group out there called the Mom Project, which helps kind of retool, retrain, and hire moms who stepped out of the workforce but want to get back in it. We're talking to a new group that just got announced recently called Skill Up, which is trying to help displaced resources or individuals from this COVID crisis. And we think that that's an interesting source for us. Year Up is another example of it. So we're looking at a lot of different avenues. We're in discussions with, in fact, working with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They have a program with the Department of Defense, so we can go after and help bring veterans in. And so as a veteran kind of finishes their years of service and they start looking to where their career can be in the civilian population, How can we help that? And so that's another avenue that we're exploring. We think it's going to take all of those things, and we think that we can serve a much broader audience if we do that. You asked the question about universities. That's one I want to kind of come to because I think this is a really interesting one. I'll give you a story that I think will encapsulate it. I was talking to a dean at one of our university partnerships, and she said to me, she said, "Hey, it's funny you're here because I just got through talking with the CTO of this large oil and gas company who was asking them to build a program around data analytics." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, tell me about what's that's interesting because we graduate data analysts. How long is it going to take you to do that?" So she thought about it. She said, "Yeah, well, it's going to take us probably 6 months to build the curriculum. And then another 6 months, we're going to have to test that out and make sure we get the approvals. And then once we launch that curriculum, it's going to take probably for them to complete that 3 semesters because they're not going to be able to take all those courses in one time and they're going to have to build on it." And so I said, "So 2.5 years from now, you're going to be able to graduate people with data analytics skills. And my guess is you're probably going to focus on what, Tableau and Power BI? Yeah. Okay, well, what about Snowflake? What about Spotfire? What about the next evolution of technology around that?" "Yeah, well, we're going to have to realign that whole program." Well, my point is they're not equipped to do that. And this is where, and I don't expect them to be able to do that. And what I try to tell our university partners is we're not trying to replace what you do. We're trying to supplement it. We're trying to create that last mile so that you produce really amazing, well-rounded students with certain technical or skills, expertise. And then we can help bridge that gap so that organizations can find the talent that are very specific to their needs, and we can turn on a dime, and we can do that much quicker, much more flexibly than maybe a large institution could do.
You know, it's really interesting to hear you say that. As someone who's been taught in college, taught in universities myself, part-time as an adjunct faculty member, you know, who's worked to help universities build new programs. You see the lag between when you want to start something and when it takes to bring it to actual fruition and start graduating students with those skills. So I've seen firsthand what you describe. And I wonder what your thoughts are on sort of a rethink that a lot of colleges and universities have been having, which is, you know, how do you balance that need to produce people who have sort of general analytical, cognitive, skills, where problem solving skills, a general set of knowledge versus just job skills, right? Like there's this constant argument whether you take people from a liberal arts education and we've given them really good skills in terms of communication abilities and mathematics, but when they and within philosophy or in economics and these are great pieces of knowledge to have a more informed population and to have people be able to make hopefully good decisions and have a life of learning, but they may not have those specific job skills. So I'm curious, like you said, you see yourself as supplementing that. Is it just structurally impossible for universities that you think to actually do both together? And so are we really headed towards a future where there has to be this public-private partnership where universities are set up to do really great things around that base level education and of course research and sort of cutting edge kind of research around technology, things like that, but they're not as great at sort of providing very specific job skills, especially in a fast moving industry like technology?
So it's interesting you asked that question, and I could speak, we could do an entire section on this, so I want to be real careful not to get too far on this. And I want to start off by saying that our university partners provide an amazing value for the individuals that they graduate. So let's start with that. But we are dealing with a system that's hundreds of years old that is created around an economic model. There's a very specific economic model that works for them. So the ability to concentrate and gain and deliver their services across this 4-year period is something that systematically I think they're going to have to rethink, right? And I used to draw an old graph where I would say, okay, here's how it works. You go and get an education, and then that stops, and then you come up here, and then you go on your career path. What I actually think what you're going to start to see is a bit of a cycle or enjoyment, if you will. You're going to get your education in a burst manner, very specific to the skills, and you get experience. And then you got to go back and and so it becomes a lifetime of learning and employment. And I think until we can figure out how we do that from a university perspective, that model is going to struggle. And I do think you're going to see, I think you're going to see an emergence of that. I think you're going to see people start to embrace that. I think you're going to see more trade skills or universities in the private sector that are able to bridge that gap. And I would really be anxious to see how some of the more flagship universities can figure out how to do that. They are doing that now through partnerships. But I think that's an important piece. There's another piece that I think is really interesting too, because you were talking about liberal arts. And when you talk specifically about technology, here's what's really interesting, right? Because of the emergence of technology and because so many of these tools have come and the ability to integrate and the cloud and you actually see a shift from the type of resource that you need with technical expertise from the old heavy code to what's now being used as low code, no code. Mm-hmm. And what does low code, no code really mean? It means that you understand the functionality within a technology, okay? And you have the ability to then leverage that technology to solve, in this case, a business challenge. And so what you then need is the skill not to be able to program and create that, but the skill to be able to talk to a business user and say, tell me your problems, tell me what you're trying to achieve, and let me help get this technology to work for you. So the funny thing is, we are actually seeing that our clients who hire, especially on the experience side, if they find a resource that comes from a liberal arts background, but has learned the technology, they're amazing because they can talk to the customer, they can talk to the specific and understand those business challenges, and then they can transition that and translate that into how the technology solves their solution.
You know, I think that's so true. I've talked to so many people involved with training and involved with education and, tech hiring, and being able to find somebody that kind of has the skills to be able to translate the technical into the practical, or, and talk to a BU about helping them solve their problems is valuable. And you see a lot of that, maybe even more of that than you do in the marketplace than sort of, like you said, hardcore coding and the hardcore engineering. And I say that as someone who started as an engineering and mathematics major. So let's talk about some of those specific skills. I think this is a great segue. What are some of the skills that people who are going through the Talent Path program now are learning?
I'm going to break that answer into two parts. The first is I'm going to answer very specifically, what are we teaching them? So our training, because of what I just described, actually balances two things, right? So we have the technical training that's very specific. And so what we'll do is we'll train them on a base set of technical skills, technical disciplines, and then we'll enhance that with very specific technology applications or platforms or whatnot. So that's a big piece of it and a significant part. But it is the EQ skills, if you will, the softer skills that we also have to teach. And in particular, when you're dealing with people coming from a college setting, and it is not to in any way indict the last generation or universities, but the work readiness, they're not necessarily being taught. And so you have to really try to drive and teach that, right? So that's what we're teaching within it very specifically. And that's the framework. Now, if you talk about what technologies are in the hottest demand, that's a different thing. And we can obviously plug and play and we do a lot of that. But what I see, and actually I see COVID has accelerated that, is that there's really 3 or 4 things that are out there that are driving that. First is absolutely cloud, right? So cloud is driving a very different approach to technology, to how businesses use that. The second is big data. And big data it's just overwhelming in terms of the implication that it's having. And I'll speak to that in a minute. Security is absolutely a big piece of that, right? So you see those 3 things out there as kind of themes that are there. we are seeing very specifically COVID is driving companies to, if you will, through their digital transformation. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but the premise of this drive from digital transformation is that their customers are now looking to engage them and to buy from them in a very different way. I mean, we just created the biggest social experiment on remote work in the history of mankind, right? And so it's not going to go away, and it's going to have profound, far-reaching implications. So companies are saying, I need to figure out how I get my services to my customers, how I engage my customers in a different way. And so that whole cloud, that whole, pushing things back out from a web and a mobile perspective becomes really important. But the other piece of that is the big data, where they're saying, okay, but I need to figure to do that. I need to figure out where my customers are and how they're buying. And so all of a sudden, big data becomes this amazing thing that they're like, I need to get the analytics. I need to understand that. I need to see the trends. So we're seeing data visualization, data management, data science. We're seeing business analytics, again, that taking of a business user or an end user's challenge and solving it technically. We're seeing that as an overwhelming demand in the marketplace right now. So that's probably one of our hottest skills that we train on.
Now, you touched on a couple times as we've been chatting, COVID-19, the pandemic, and the acceleration of companies' digital transformation plans, of the effect that it's had on remote work. I'd love to hear your insights on what the future of work is going to look like with this increasing trend to, people being able to hire employees who aren't necessarily in a specific geographic location, right? Right. So, and you kind of touched on this earlier. It's something I've talked with a lot of people about, which is it opens up the doors to hire a more diverse workforce because you can recruit from anywhere in the world, anywhere in, the country. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and there is, that's still shaking out. There are some big shifts. It used to be you needed to be in San Francisco, in Manhattan, in London, in Singapore, in Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, in a large urban center to be able to sort of, companies had offices and headquarters and they wanted to have people together. But COVID has kind of turned that on its head as everybody's working remotely now, beyond sort of those technologies like data analytics and cloud and sort of those digital transformation technologies. But beyond that, going to the overall thinking of companies about where they need to have their people physically located. What are you hearing from your customers?
I mean, you absolutely hit it on the head, and I want to kind of acknowledge that. When we saw the shift, so I'll give you our situation. March 16th, we turned on a dime. We literally had training for all of our consultants was in person. We have 4 training facilities: LA, Houston, Atlanta, DC, and guess what we had to do? Everything's virtual. So we had to pivot. We had to figure out how to deliver that. We had to shift, and here we were lamenting the fact that when can we get them back into the classroom? But what we realized is, oh my God, we were able to do this. We were able to do this in a profound way. We actually found ways to create the right level of engagement. So in fact, tomorrow we have another virtual happy hour of one of our cohorts, and I'm going to join it. And everybody gets together, and then you get in these different rooms, and this is the topic here, and this is the topic here. And so we figured out how to adjust to it. And what we realized is, oh my God, now I can actually change the profile of how I recruit, who I recruit. I love that, because we were just speaking on I was speaking and moderating a diversity and inclusion panel yesterday, and that very subject came up. Do we think now, with the rethinking of work location, that it changes the availability of diverse talent? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, it opens the aperture in a profound way. So I think we're going to see that. I think we're already looking at what does this look like post-COVID. And in fact, if I could tell you to short any stock, I'd be shorting REITs, right? Real estate is going to be
commercial
a huge challenge, because they're going to say they don't need half that space.
Yeah, no, we see the same thing, which is, you have the overhead of a building, and you have the cost of the building itself, and so that everything that we've heard from folks say that when you talk to CFOs and you talk to C-level executives is this rethink in terms of needing a physical presence. It's I don't think any of them have ever said like, yeah, it's totally going to disappear, but it is going to be much smaller, or it could be much smaller. And because what this has done is even for teams, and I'll add to your story a little bit. Our team works remotely quite a bit. We were already set up for that, and it wasn't that much of a transition. There were you get a few things that are headaches, but you learn to overcome those. But if you were set up for that, or you had a business plan that was kind of a digital transformation plan that was already in process, you already had some remote work, as long as you could speed that up, then and accelerate that, then you did pretty well. So I 100%, that's what we hear too. Is there I'd love to hear kind of what you think maybe the future of kind of tech hiring and sort of the tech jobs market looks like. Like, what do you see? Because you're in this day in and day out, maybe, 2-3 years down the road. Is it an acceleration of things that are happening now? I mean, there's always that black swan event, right? But that you could unforesee. But what do you see, a few years down the road?
I mean, it's exactly that. So again, give you a great example within us. We are already planning that post COVID, when we're able to actually reopen our offices, and we're in phase one, so people are allowed in there on a voluntary basis with masks and all of that. But what we see is we're gonna implement a flexible work location approach, where we probably say, look, if you're in a certain location, let's get 2 days or 3 days in the office. And let's ask our leaders to facilitate their meetings around that, where proximity is necessary, or maybe more put better, valuable. Then let's use that. But we're going to change our space. We'll probably use half the space. We'll probably do a 2 or 3 day remote work structure, which means I can do half the space, which means my office space is going to change to more of a hoteling concept, right? And so I think that's going to continue. We're already seeing, it's interesting, we're already seeing from us, graduating students or consultants within our Talent Path program is a great example. We have a class that's graduating in Atlanta and one that just graduated in Houston. They're working for clients that are in LA and in San Francisco and in New York. And the clients have said, well, I don't care where they are. Before this crisis, they had to be in LA or they had to be in New York. But all of a sudden now I don't care. So I think that's going to accelerate. I think we are looking at that black swan event, and I think it's going to continue to accelerate. I think it is. I have talked to so many CEOs that say the same thing. They challenge their CFO, figure out how we sublease the space. They challenge their facilities group, rethink the structure of it. We're all looking at that and saying this has to be the wave of the future.
Well, Kip, I really appreciate you taking the time to share the story of Talent Path with us.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
And thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us. You can listen to more episodes of Dynamic Developer on your favorite podcast platform, or watch a video of each episode, as well as read a transcript at Tech Republic.